Hello, welcome to another video. Today we're going to talk about the iceberg concept of culture. It fits in really well with chapter 2, and I like talking about it in chapter 2 because we have the opportunity to take a look at what defines our culture, what defines who we are. And so when we think about last chapter, when we talked about values, we talked about who helps us define our values, what's important to us, and how we exhibit that behavior. And so really that comes down to what is our culture. And when we take a look at it, let me back up. So my community has a history of inviting and hosting a number of foreign exchange students who come to my tiny town in Southwest Wisconsin to experience American life. And I love the opportunity to get to know these kids, and they're kids, they're not 18 yet for the most part. I really appreciate the opportunity to get to know these kids because I ask them about their culture. And when my children have an opportunity to engage with those students, they learn that there are some things that they have in common. There are a lot of things that they have in common. And then there are other things that they do not. And so my question to you is, when you think about what is your culture, how do you define your culture? How do you define your culture? Do you have an answer? So let's take a look at the iceberg concept of culture. I'm going to share my screen with you so you can see that. Okay, and I'm going to shift my head because it's on another monitor. It's on another screen for me. So what you are seeing is what we call, like I said, the iceberg concept of culture. Now, when we talk about icebergs, we know that icebergs are about 10% above the waterline and 90% below the waterline. So I always liken this to when you're in middle school and you have a culture fair. What are the things that you display and exhibit? Well, they are those things that are above the line. You oftentimes have some type of food from the culture to share, dress, what their traditional dress looks like. And I say traditional because as we've become more global, we start to see how many of the same looks and styles are spanning across the globe. So when we think about a culture's dress, we think about their traditional dress. Music, again, that can be more modern music or music that we produce here in the United States or in the UK or in the Western world has permeated around the world. And so we have places like Bollywood who very much resemble Hollywood in the American culture, but with their own twist, doing their thing. So food, dress, music, visual arts, drama, crafts, dance, literature, language, celebrations, and games. Those are all of the things that when we take a look at a culture, they're easy to see, they're easy to understand. And they really, for the most part, do not cause conflict with who we are personally and what we think we know, or what we know, because they're not very controversial, right? It's once we start looking at the below the line parts of our culture that we really start taking a look at those things that can be considered a little more controversial. And when I say controversial, I just mean that they're different from what we are used to, what our culture says is the thing that we do, or how our family or our community says this is how we do things. So when we take a look at this below the line, we're talking about concepts of courtesy. How do we show another person that we're courteous to them? And rules of conduct and conversation. So in our American culture, it's very important to us that we have eye contact with those people that we are communicating with, right? So as a teacher, as an instructor who typically stands in front of a classroom, I am looking for eye contact from students that's telling me students are paying attention, they're engaged, they're connecting, and I can see whether we're making that connection or not, or if there's confusion, so that I can circle back and I can try to explain a concept in another way. So we have that opportunity. In other cultures around the world, even Native American culture, Asian cultures, eye contact is very prescribed. So as a student, you would not look me in the eye. That would be disrespectful. Typically, it's you do not look your elder in the eye or somebody who is of a higher position or has more knowledge than you. That is a sign of respect. And so it's really important to understand that. The concept of time is another one that's super interesting. So in the United States, we have this concept of to be early is to be on time is to be late is to be left. We really value our time. It's super important to us. We don't want people to be late because that's wasting our time, right? In, let's say, Latin American countries, Brazil is one that I can think of off the top of my head. The concepts of time are much more relaxed. If you show up 5, 10, even 15 minutes late, it's seriously not a big deal. You might even have somebody show up an hour late to a meeting. And part of what's going on there is that if they're in another meeting with somebody else or they're spending time with family, you don't stop that engagement to say, oh, got another meeting, I got to get going. You finish what's going on, what you're dealing with in front of you, and then you follow up with the next meeting. So these are all different concepts of culture and what it means to be a part of our culture. And these are certainly, like I said, those below the line things are pretty, they're unspoken rules. The emotional load of them is pretty high. We have high stakes into these ideas and concepts. And when somebody doesn't act according to what we perceive to be, when they don't act like our culture says this is the appropriate way to do things, we're kind of like, okay, what do we do with this? And some people will say, hey, okay, so this is how it is for us. I just want to explain this to you. What does it mean for you? What does it look like in your culture? Ask those questions. People love it when you ask questions. When you show that interest in wanting to get to know them, when wanting to get to know their culture, they love that. So embrace that. And then other people will be like, wait a minute, you just dissed me. This is how we do it in our culture. And therefore you need to learn how to do it our way. And I'm not saying that those folks that come to the United States to work, to do business, to live, won't eventually get there and understand these concepts of our culture. But it takes time for sure. And if they're not taught, if we don't extend that opportunity to educate them, then how do they know? How do they know? Just like, how do you know if you were to go to another culture? So take that opportunity as a learning opportunity, use it to enhance your own knowledge and come to a greater understanding of other people. So why that's really important is that once you understand these things, then you can reach out, you can compromise, you can do business better because you have this knowledge, this understanding, and you can relate to those folks even better. So that's really only a benefit to you and your business, the company that you work for, or the company that you run, manage. So that's really important to do your best to reach out, to understand not only somebody else's culture, but your own culture. When you are asked, what does it mean? What is your concept of time? How do you problem solve? What is the right process in this culture? What are the rules? Sometimes we just don't even think about those things. They're so unwritten and unconscious. We just know, but we know because we've been taught. We know because from the very beginning, from infancy to today, these concepts have been ingrained into our behaviors and our being. So that's really what I wanted to share with you on the concept of culture. I think it's really important that we recognize it for what it is. And if we think about that, our culture in terms of that iceberg, again, like I said, about 10% is what people, you can do a quick Google search and you can find out and see what a culture looks like. But until you take the time to read the literature, understand what the religion is, really dive into that religion and understand its foundations and principles, and how they treat their elderly, how we treat our elderly. What are those, what are the rules, what are the expectations? When we really sit and think about what those things are and what that means, we're going to be so much better for having that opportunity to reflect and have that deeper understanding of ourselves, but also taking that time to get to know somebody else who's different from us.